welcome to you all. What a wonderful turnout yet again. I'm always amazed at the pulling power of the Welling Garden City Male Voice Choir. And others here tonight, probably. A warm welcome to you all, and what promises to be a really very special occasion tonight. It's framed around tributes to the great man Paul Robeson, one of the real inspirational men or figures of the last century. Paul Robeson's achievements were absolutely colossal, and the number of written works and studies on Robeson were also enormous. I'm thinking principally of the biography by Martin Duberman, and the collection of essays in Geoffrey Stewart's collection. These are balanced and critical and comprehensive works, which, well, they don't shy away from some of the more controversial aspects of Robeson's life. But they also document in some detail the suffering that Robeson and fellow black American activists had to go through when they challenged the system, when they challenged racism and persecution in the United States at the time. So they're very, very balanced and very, very critical. But tonight is all about positives, yes? It's unashamedly about the many positives in Paul Robeson's life. It's a tribute in both word and song to aspects of human communication that Robeson knew a thing or two about, really, word and song. And we're very, very fortunate tonight to have as our two special guests two men with international reputations in these two domains, word and song. Our principal speaker for tonight is Tony Benn, a special guest, and he can also sing a bit. He'd never admit to it, but he really does. And our other special guest tonight can sing a bit too. So Willard White, our main soloist tonight, also an accomplished actor and orator, of course. I'd also like to say that both men have donated their valuable time free of charge, and I'd like to welcome you and thank you both for that. Thank you. Paul Robeson Jr. unfortunately was not able to make it tonight, nor were any of his family. And I suggested at one stage that maybe we had set up a live video link, but that proved not to be possible either, because Paul Robeson Jr. is actually on a tour at the moment, a promotional tour for his new book. So I did try, but he does send his greetings and best wishes for a successful meeting. And in fact, he sent me an email yesterday with a message in it, which he'd like me to read out. Dear Philip, please send my deepest respects to the Honourable Tony Benn and Sir Willard White and all those who have contributed to the ceremony. I'm sure your hard work will ensure that the event will be memorable. My very best wishes, Paul. And now the actual message itself. Dear friends at SOAS, I deeply regret that I cannot be with you in person on this important occasion to join you in celebrating the enduring legacy of a great black American who was, at the same time, a distinguished citizen of the world. A great artist who chose to use his talents as a weapon in humanity's quest for freedom. Full freedom, not an inferior brand. My father spent 12 critical years of growth and development based in London from 1927 through 1939. It was there, amongst your predecessors, that he discovered Africa and came to the great anti-colonialist freedom fighters of the past century. And if it was there that he grew to feel more African in spirit, as he became inspired by his study of African languages and cultures at SOAS. So today it is fitting that his memory is being honoured with a plaque at SOAS. His sojourn there helped to broaden his cultural perspective immensely and was directly related to his capacity to feel a sense of oneness with the white working people whom he came to know and love. My father's old friend, Tony Benn, has aptly described him as an inspirer. Black writer James Baldwin observed that Paul Robeson gave us the power to perceive and the courage to resist. One of the ways Paul himself summed up his commitment was to sing the great hymn of the Chartist movement, Jerusalem, and the closing lines go like this: I will not cease from mental fight, nor shall my sword sleep in my hand, till we have built Jerusalem in England's green and pleasant land. Thank you, Paul Robeson Jr. We're actually taping this, as you know, ladies and gentlemen, so I hope to be able to hand-deliver the DVD to Paul Robeson Jr. at Christmas in New York, and we'll watch it together. It'll be a real pleasure and privilege. Paul Robeson Jr. did actually send us something tangible and visible. The wonderful image you see projected onto the screen there at the back wall is his favourite image of his father, and you can understand why. I think it's absolutely sensational myself. And that's the image that, in fact, has gone onto the plaque, which Colin will unveil later on, and with the wording underneath, precisely like that. So he did send that, and well, I think it's wonderful. This Paul Robeson celebration is a culmination of quite a lot of work, hard work, teamwork that we finally got there, and I'd like to thank a number of people who have contributed to tonight's event, helped me along the way. For financial assistance, the former director Colin Bundy, and present director Paul Webley, and Keith Howard and the staff common room committee generously donated some money to help out tonight, and Keith was very valuable assistance with the musical arrangements for tonight. Thank you, Keith. Also, two unions, Unison and UCU, formerly AUT, donated, and the alumni office. Thank you very much. I'd also like to say a special thanks to Martin Hill, whom I met for the first time earlier on. He's a personal friend of Sir Willard's, and he was instrumental in really putting me in contact with Sir Willard, and so facilitating tonight's event. So thank you very much, Martin, for that. For organisational assistance, Mary O'Shea, Kelly Scott, and Zidra Stipnitz. And, of course, the AV team, the boys in the back room, Mike, Gary, and Jerry, and Des. Thank you very much. And Patrick Coy in the print room for the programmes. And Peter Garrett for the display of the Robeson documents in the senior common room that was put up today. Peter Garrett, thank you very much. One person I'd especially like to thank for her no-nonsense advice at various stages in the proceedings is Christine Warwick. One particular piece of no-nonsense Yorkshire advice sticks in my mind. When I first put the programme together, having sung with the male voice choir for 15 or 20 years, I put a couple of breaks in, okay, just small breaks. I know that middle-aged men, for example, without going into fine detail, they have certain requirements, over a period of 1 or 2 hours, and I was sensitive to that, so a couple of breaks. And Christine saw the programme, she said, "What are the breaks doing there, Phil?" And I said, "Well, the breaks are for the middle-aged men in the choir and anybody else who wants a break." She said, "You can't have breaks." And I said, "Why not?" She said, "Well, there's going to be lots of VIPs there tonight, okay? And busy people with busy diaries, full diaries. And if they see break, okay, in the programme, they'll have a couple of drinks, listen to a song, and then they'll be off. They'll get a taxi, you'll never see them again." So I thought to myself, well, what do I do about this? And then I thought, well, she wines and dines with the movers and shakers in Westminster. She has a very close family connection with the movers and shakers in Westminster. She must be right. So the breaks went. So if anybody experiences any problems tonight, in the choir or anywhere else, Christine's sitting on the second row. Yay! Anyway, thank you to you. Paul Robeson and SOAS. Well, Paul Robeson studied Swahili and phonetics. This is actually a registration admission card signed and filled out by the great man himself. It's probably not too easy to see from the back. But you can see it's phonetics and Swahili, 30 individual lessons, £18.50. But yeah, glad we don't charge those rates these days. It was actually £25 initially, but he's crossed it out. I think it was working with Kenyatta and Azikwe. He managed to bargain them down, So I'm very, very proud to carry this in my briefcase for so long. With Robeson Paul, Rutgers, degrees in universities, and Columbia, LL.B, purpose of study, educational, and so on. And I think one of his referees is in Bush House recently. Anyway, it's a wonderful historical document. This is 1934. Ironically, it was the first year he visited the Soviet Union as well, which was delicious irony to that. He hadn't appeared in Showboat yet and sung his iconic Oman River. That was, I think, 36. But that was only 2 years away. But he'd been performing for about 10 years, and he was a real star. You know? He was an international star. Concert, opera, and plays. He'd done Othello in London, 1930, done Porgy in Gershwin's Porgy and Bess, at a time when no US company would employ him. So here he is. You know, just imagine having such a star in your, I don't know, phonetics or Swahili or Hausa class, you know. What a privilege, what a thrill. And I was thinking this morning that, imagine the scene, the class list at the beginning of the year, you know. Jagger, Philip. All right, who's he? You know. Warwick, Christine, never heard of her. Robeson, Paul, wow. Yeah. Fantastic, really was. He, in fact, was a brilliant all-round linguist. He studied other major African languages like Zulu and Igbo. And the famous, controversial Moscow concert that Willard and I were talking about earlier on, June the 14th, 1949, his repertoire covered about 7 or 8 different languages, in addition to Russian, and he actually presented the show in Russian. He sings in Italian, French, Spanish, Chinese, and Yiddish. Yeah, it was a really high voltage event, very, very high voltage event. He sang some appropriately anti-fascist songs, which pleased his audience and his hosts, one in particular, of course. This is 1949, so Stalin wasn't there, but of course he's probably listening to it. Okay, but he also departed from the script, and he slipped in several pro-freedom, pro-liberty songs, 2 of which were in Yiddish, and that was in support of a number of his Jewish friends who were being harassed and worse by Stalin, which was quite a brave move, really. That did not go down well with the number 1 at the time, but Robeson got away with it, and it was an absolutely charged concert. London in the 1930s, when Paul Robeson came to SOAS, it was really a rallying point, a lightning rod for prominent Caribbean and African thinkers and intellectuals and radicals, especially those working in the anti-colonial movements of the time. For example, Robeson came into contact with the 2 great Trinidadian thinkers, George Padmore and C.L.R. James. It was James he was also a cricket writer, James that referred to Robeson as a man of immense strength and great gentleness, which is a wonderful description, really. He also came into contact with a number of prominent African intellectuals and radicals who were to become leaders of their independent countries eventually. Jomo Kenyatta was at LSE in the 1930s, went on to become Prime Minister and President of Kenya, I think in 1963. Kwame Nkrumah went on to become a Prime Minister of newly independent Ghana in, I think, 1957. And Nnamdi Azikiwe, who became the first president of Nigeria in 1963, and who I met many years ago. And it was contact with intellectuals like this that really helped to shape Robeson's political philosophy and political ideology. It also stimulated and fed an interest and curiosity in African civilizations, African languages and cultures, which is what eventually brought him to SOAS. And I don't suppose the irony of being taught Swahili by ex-colonials was lost on Paul Robeson at the time, given the people he was associating with. Many years later, our first speaker, Terry Bishop. Terry, are you? Oh, good. I'm trying to find you alone. Was registrar at the time. Okay, this is about 60 years after Robeson was actually at SOAS. Terry Bishop actually discovered the documentation that we have some of which we have on display tonight, when he was academic registrar at SOAS. And so, Terry, I'd like to invite you to come up and relive the moment. Terry Bishop.
Well, Phil, thank you very much indeed for inviting me to this remarkable occasion. It was many years ago, and it was a quiet, not to say dull, day in the registry when the phone went. And it was my secretary. Well, this dates the story. We had secretaries in those days. And she came on the phone with an unusually skeptical note to her voice. And she said, Terry, she said, I don't know that I should put this person through, but there's a man on the phone who says he's Spike Milligan. Well, I had the reaction I guess most of us would have. You know, it's some friend being silly, ringing up in a goon show voice. With weary resignation, I said, well, put him through. And to my astonishment and delight, it was Spike Milligan. Now, why on earth was he ringing me? Well, unbeknown to me at that time, he was born in India. And we had a bit of a chat about that, because both my father and grandfather were born in India. And we told some interesting stories. But then he came to the point that he was writing a little piece about his family, reminiscences about life in India. And he was trying to track down one particular character. And this was a Major Robinson. I'm afraid I've forgotten the guy's first name, but Major Robinson. And he said, now, Major Robinson, I think, studied Hindustani, as he put it, at SOAS. Is that possible? And I said, well, when would that have been? He said, in the early 30s. I said, very possible, because in the 20s and 30s, there were actually very few degree students at SOAS. The majority of students were colonial administrators, we touched on that, military men, diplomatic people, businessmen, and so on. In fact, in the charter at that time, I remember there was a wonderful phrase about training people to go out to govern our eastern dominions. I think that's kept well hidden now. But, so he said, would it be possible to trace whether Major Robinson actually did study Hindustani at SOAS? And I said, yes, Hindi was taught from the very beginning as one of the major languages. And I said, it's a comparatively easy job, because the records from those days, very simple record system, alphabetical, these things were alphabetical by year. So I said, I'll have a look through for you and get back to you. A couple of days later, I actually delved into the archives, and these forms are kept, or were kept, in incredibly heavy steel folders, going back to, I think, to the 20s. And I just went through them from, I think, about 1926 to the outbreak of war. Didn't find the major. But even in the 30s, filing clerks weren't infallible. And I thought, well, you know, let's try ROB. So I kept going until I came to 1933-34. And suddenly this leapt out of the page at me. I couldn't believe my eyes. Can't be. Then I saw American. I don't claim at that time I knew very much about the life and times of Paul Robeson, other than his great show business career and his record, of course, as a social reformer. But I did know that he'd studied law. And in fact, I knew he'd started a law career only to encounter great prejudice. So when I saw this LL.B. degree from Columbia, I knew we'd got the man. So sadly, poor old Spike's no longer with us. But if he hadn't telephoned me that day, maybe we would never have known Paul would have been a student. Thank you very much.
If I had £1 for every time I'd heard that story. We've dined out in it a few times. Our next speaker is the present head of the Africa Department, Dr. Akin Oyatade. Paul Robeson, as we know, studied a number of African languages, principally Swahili, but also some Igbo and Zulu. I'm not sure about Oga, about Yoruba, or Hausa. Akin's going to talk about, I think, about Paul Robeson's emerging black consciousness and his sense of identity as he lived in London and studied at SOAS. Akin, please.
Well, my tribute will concentrate on Paul Robeson's motivation for studying African languages and phonetics at SOAS and his connection with future African leaders in the 1930s. It has been documented that Robeson made London his primary residence in the 1930s. It has also been noted that it was here in London he recalled that he discovered Africa. The records reveal that in 1933, Robeson undertook the study of several African languages at the School of Oriental Studies, now SOAS. He also took part in activities sponsored by the West African Students' Union and became acquainted with future African leaders, Jomo Kenyatta of Kenya, Nnamdi Azikiwe, who later became the first president of Nigeria. It was here in London that Robeson began to stress the positive aspects of African life. He argued that African culture was more spiritual and more grounded in community than that of Europe and white America. Long before the Black Power movement, he stressed the need to be proud of being black. For according to him, no one respects a man who does not respect himself. This statement echoes a similar one made by Dr. J.E.K. Agri, who said, "I am proud of my color. Whoever is not proud of his color is not fit to live." Robeson's motivation for studying African languages is the quest for the connection with his African roots. He knew that language is the key that unlocks several aspects of cultural understanding. He was not theoretical or philosophical about it. He took a practical step. The fact that we in our department still encounter second-generation African students, African American, African Caribbean students who come to register to learn an African language for the same or similar reasons, 70 years after Robeson's registration at SOAS, is a testimony that what motivated him then is not an irrelevant matter today. Robeson was a man ahead of his time in the practical solution he sought for this problem. There's a slight difference, though. In the 1930s, as Theo said, Robeson's teachers were European colonial officers. Today, we're a mixture of African and European teachers, lecturers, and researchers, the colonials as well. Now, unlike many African blacks who saw their role as one of helping to uplift and modernize African people, Robeson thought it imperative that the American-born regain their own African roots. He rejected the idea of assimilation that was prevalent then among black elite. He insisted that in every black man flows the rhythm of Africa. Indeed, he wrote, "I came to consider that I was an African." Yet, Robeson clearly saw this return to Africa as a spiritual rather than a literal journey. He rejected separatism, no less than assimilationism, and never abandoned his vision of an integrated society. Instead, he fashioned a worldview that anchored cultural diversity in universal values, among which the most important was a faith in human solidarity that lay at the heart of his encounter with socialism. I am convinced that his views of cultural diversity in universal values and a faith in human solidarity were some of the issues he would have discussed at length with his African acquaintances, many of whom later became leaders in their different countries. There is no doubt in my mind that if he had come to the UK or to America to study at the same time that Kwame Nkrumah, Jomo Kenyatta, Nnamdi Azikiwe, and the others came, he would also have returned and hold a very important position similar to those of his friends at the time. I hope and pray that the memory of Paul Robeson will live on, and the many lives he touched before his passing, and many he is still touching through his songs and tributes such as we are paying to him today. Thank you.
Thank you, Akeem, for a very moving tribute there. Moving on in the program, ladies and gentlemen. Some of you might have seen on a recent television program our next guest turning the tables on some prominent interviewers like Paxman and Humphreys and Snow. And at one stage, he gently admonished them in a very gentle, civilized, characteristic way for occasionally using evaluative tags to introduce some of the more controversial interviewees, like, hardline, dissident, whatever, hard left. And they ended up agreeing with him. So, bearing that admonishment in mind, when I started thinking about how to introduce him, I thought, well, I better play it really safe and neutral here, okay? And go for some kind of well-worn cliche, something like, he needs no introduction, blah, blah, blah. Then I thought, no, that's a bit banal and weak for such an occasion as this. So I'd like to introduce him with just two observations. One is from a journalist and the other is personal anecdotal. In The Independent on Sunday, he's described as, he caused trouble for 51 years as an MP, longer than any parliamentarian other than Prime Ministers Lloyd George, Churchill and Heath. So he's a fighter, right? And the second one is based upon personal experience. As some of you may know, Tony was MP for Chesterfield, Labour MP for Chesterfield, from, I think it was 84 to 2001. Right. And it just so happens that my sister Diana and her husband Ian and family live in Chesterfield. They've always been Labour activists, and indeed Tony knows the family really well. So when the kids were young, we'd go and visit my sister, and we'd always go down to the Labour Club, game of snooker, bingo, whatever, on a Saturday night with the kids. And so I got to know quite a few of the local Labour Party members. And I can honestly say, in the 10 or 15 years we used to go down to the Labour Club, I never heard an ill word spoken about Tony Benn, nothing negative. Now, I know it was a Labour Club, and I know it was a safe seat, but it's still quite remarkable, okay? So he was very, very popular. He was a great popular fighter. Ladies and gentlemen, Tony Benn.
I can't think of anything I would rather do than come and pay a tribute to Paul Robeson. I don't know how many people here met him. I did. I met him in 1958. I'd always admired his music. I'd always been interested in his ideas. But my dad and I were on the committee to get his passport restored. I wrote to the Congress of Cultural Freedom, which was one of the CIA front organizations, to ask them why they didn't support that. But at any rate, he got it, and my dad and I invited him to the Houses of Parliament. And it was a most extraordinary event. Celebrities, people come and gape at celebrities. But walking with Paul Robeson through the central lobby of the House of Commons, like going through a pile of iron filings with an electromagnet, they just gathered round him because they wanted to be near him. They wanted to hear what he said. And we went and had tea in the House of Lords. My dad was in the Lords, and we had with me an old aunt of mine who was only about 4'5" tall. She was 85, and she devoted her life to looking after mental patients. Apparently she was brilliant. She'd sit on the lap of a psychiatric murder, and he'd tell you what they'd done, and she'd laugh, and that helped his improvement, helped him. But at any rate, she said, "Do you think, Mr. Robeson, you'd sing?" And Paul Robeson sang Old Man River. You could hardly hear it, but the whole place was silent. It was a quite extraordinary experience. And as we left, Herbert Morrison, not exactly the most radical figure in the world, for those who remember Herbert, but he detached himself and came over and had a word. But as a result of reading about him, I came to learn about his political role. I'd always loved his music. And you will know that he was a brilliant scholar, brilliant student, brilliant lawyer, brilliant sportsman. Went to Rutgers University, and I think in his book he says, it's instead of going to Lincoln where many black Americans went, he went to Rutgers, and that overcame the feeling that he might have not been able to go to another university. And of course he was the son of a slave. Now when we talk about our cultural values, which we're preaching in the Middle East, we sometimes forget that the West enslaved people. I mean, my old constituency in Bristol was a great slave city, and many of the so-called benefactors in Bristol made their money out of the slave trade. 10 million Africans were shipped out of Africa to the New World as slaves, and Paul was the son of one of them. And so that whole story was so interesting. Then when he came here, as you all know, he said he discovered two things. First of all, he was an African, and he came here in order to study the depth and understand it, and also he was working class. And my favorite film, I don't know if anyone's seen it, is Proud Valley. Has anyone seen it? It's a film I saw in about 1940. The story is a very simple one. Paul Robeson is an unemployed black American miner, and he goes to South Wales to get a job in the pits. And the miners look at him. He can't employ a black man in the pits. And then they look at their faces, and of course they're covered in coal. So he joins, and then the choir is singing. He says, I burst into tears when I see this clip. But the choir, the Welsh choir, is singing, and the conductor says, as dies away, I'll beat the lead part with my hand. And as they come to that point, out from the street, through the window, Paul Robeson, Lord God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, and all the miners rush out and get him to join the choir, and then the story ends in a rather march on London to save the pits open. But it is a very extraordinary story, and particularly the study of African culture. I spent a year in Zimbabwe during the war. I learned to fly there when it was southern Rhodesia. And the thing that impressed me then, and led me to take a lifelong interest in African liberation, was the way that the whole history had been utterly suppressed of the Africa itself. I mean, Cecil Rhodes went to Matabeleland and Mashonaland in 1897 and just stole all the land and gave it to white farmers. That's never mentioned in the Cecil Rhodes memorial. I met an old man called Ginyalitch. He seemed very old to me, probably younger than I am now, but he'd fought the Lobengula against Cecil Rhodes, and he came and described it all. And then the ruins, you know, Zimbabwe is named after famous ruins, and we were told when we were there, oh, of course the Africans couldn't have built that. It must have been the slave traders built it. Couldn't be Africans did it. And what Paul discovered in his studies here was the immense richness of the culture, the music, and the traditions of Africa, which had been suppressed. But of course the other thing was he became a socialist, and that was a terrible offense. He went to the Soviet Union. He said there was no racism there. He sang, as you've heard, in all the different languages. He just loved the music of the country that he visited and gave it, honored it, and it honored him by singing. And of course people just absolutely loved his music and his singing. And then of course he had the famous confrontation with the Senate. And I brought the exchange for you, which I thought might amuse you. Somebody said to him, he said, I stand here struggling for the rights of my people to be the full citizens of this country. That's why I'm here today. You want to shut up every colored person who wants to fight for the rights of his people. One of his persecutors said, why not stay in Russia? And this was his reply, because my father was a slave. My people died to build this country, and I'm going to stay right here and have a part of it just like you, and no fascist-minded people will drive me from that. Is that clear? Well, to say that to the un-American, I know George Galloway, oh boy. And then, of course, when they withdrew the passport, the grounds for withdrawing it, they found the State Department brief. And it was his passport should be withdrawn in view of the fact that the appellant, that's Paul, the appellant's frank admission that he has for years been extremely active politically on behalf of the independence of the colonial peoples of Africa. This is America, which now has apparently been in favor of democracy for hundreds of years. It's new to me, but at the same time, that was why they wanted him to have his passport denied. And of course, he didn't allow it to stop him. You know, the famous occasion he went to the Canadian border and he sang through a loudspeaker. Take away his passport. You couldn't prevent him singing across the border. And I think 30,000 people were there. And I heard him at St. Pancras Town Hall, I think, when he sang to us over a telephone. I didn't think the line was very good, but I hear that they've got the original and it is beautiful, and I believe all his music is going to be, which has been digitized, going to be released. But the thing about Paul was he spoke for everybody. He was such a human person, and he did suffer for his beliefs. I mean, to be excluded from leaving his own country. And he used to go and sing in the black churches, and I have a recording of him in Mother's Iron Church, where he sang, well, after his passport returned, and he told the story of it all. And he's just somebody who inspired people. And when you look at the world today, where things are changing a little bit, sometimes in the wrong direction, but you look at Chavez, and you look at Cuba, and you look at Evo Morales and so on, you see things are changing. And Paul is a voice for the future. And I'm so pleased this plaque is being unveiled, because although young people can't know everything that happened before, when they come here and they see that wonderful plaque, and I've been given a peep of it, though you shouldn't have done without it being unveiled, they will realize that here they are part of the inheritance of Paul Robeson and all he did. I rank him with the greatest of the last century. I'm proud to have known him and profoundly believe that his influence will remain and will develop, because he spoke for all the things that the human race needs if it is to survive and prosper. Thank you very, very much for asking.
Tony, excellent. Tony's reminded us that Paul Robeson was a man of enormous talents and accomplishments and abilities. And as he pointed out, for all-round talent, it's difficult to think of anybody in the same league. Quite breathtaking. One of my Nigerian friends recently described Paul Robeson as a freedom fighter. And I think that really sums the man up, captures the essence of the man. Several weeks ago, there was an article in The Guardian in which the writer described some of the key events in social history, British social history, key protests and radical events in our history, protests against oppression of various types. And I want to link that article to today's tributes in two ways. First of all, they were the kinds of movements, protest movements, that Robeson would definitely have been associated with had he been around at the time. The first one was 1819, Manchester, August the 16th, St. Peter's Fields. Okay? Radicals and journeymen gather to protest against the hated Corn Laws and to argue in support of male suffrage. The magistrates panic, they send in the yeomanry, they panic. 11 are killed, murdered, hundreds are maimed. It's the famous Peterloo massacre. Yeah? The kind of movement that Robeson would have been involved in had he been there at the time. The second one, we jump forward a century to 1913, Epsom Downs. It's Derby Day, and Emily Davison, a militant suffragette, she becomes a martyr to the cause by throwing herself under the King's horse. Okay? She dies in the cause. 5 years later, women get the vote. Again, the kind of progressive democratic protest that Robeson would have been associated with. And the last one I'm going to document, Robeson would certainly have been associated with. It was 1919, and the major port towns in England and Wales, London, for example, Liverpool, South Shields, Cardiff and Newport, erupt into race riots. Local black communities rise up to defend themselves against racist attacks. This was 1919. And it was the first real assertive demonstration of black consciousness, I think, in this country. And it laid the foundation for the later framework of race relations in the country. Robeson would certainly have been associated with that. And there's another feature about all those protests, with the exception of the Peterloo massacre in Manchester. There are no plaques in any of these places marking the significance of these very, very important events. There's no visible signage at all recognizing the importance they played in our democratic evolution. Okay. Now, SOAS has marked its connection with Paul Robeson. In 1998, the centenary of his birth, it organized, along with many other groups and institutes around the world, it was a conference, two-day conference, major conference, looking at his life. And of course, we have a hall of residence named after Paul Robeson as well. So SOAS has marked the connection. There was a wonderful event at Rutgers, where the Paul Robeson Cultural Centre is. Rutgers, as Tony pointed out, was Robeson's first university. I think it was in 1915. And they really went to town and organised a splendid event. And there were lots of places in Wales that commemorated the association with special events, and we'll talk about that later. Okay, well, we now also have our own wonderful plaque to celebrate the Great Man's Association with us. So at this juncture, I'd like to call on Colin Bundy, the former director of SOAS. Colin was director when I first floated this idea, and he responded immediately and generously. So Colin's going to say a few words to you and unveil the plaque. Colin Bundy.
Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, friends and comrades, the first thing I'd like to say is, in case it gets left out elsewhere in the evening, is a very particular word of thanks and congratulations to Phil Jagger for being the moving spirit behind tonight's event. I overheard Phil welcome Tony Benn here earlier this evening. Tony Benn said, "Oh yes, I know him. I've had a flood of emails." Phil, we know the feeling. Not everybody knows, and Mr. Benn may not know, that the Meteorological Office refers to Hurricane Philip. Phil's mentioned other ways in which the school has celebrated and acknowledged its link with Paul Robeson, the naming of the residence, the 1998 conference. I'd add to that, because if people can track it down, they should, the very fine little pamphlet produced by my then colleague, Richard Rathbone, in 1998 on the Robeson-SOAS link. Richard also represented the school in 2003 when English Heritage unveiled one of the blue plaques, not to 1 Buckingham Street, I notice, but 19 Branch Lane in Hampstead, where Robeson lived for some years in the 1930s. It's been mentioned, it was quoted in the words from Paul Robeson Jr., that from 1929 till the end of the 30s, Robeson made London his primary residence. Much of his time then would have seen him encounter the leading lights in British stage, screen, and opera. And I shall leave that list to the West End. But he was also active, of course, in politics. And here in those years, before, during, and immediately after his SOAS days, Robeson in London met, as Akin reminded us, Africa's future leaders. He spoke at a rally for Nehru. He met British intellectuals and politicians, Stafford Cripps, Harold Laski, Ellen Wilkinson. He came from America to here to meet Max Eastman, the great editor of Partisan Review, to meet Bill Patterson, William Patterson, the black communist leader, to meet Emma Goldman, the remarkable American anarchist leader. Here he met John Dos Passos, and in a meeting that I think challenges one's imagination, can you imagine Paul Robeson welcoming to London Gertrude Stein? But he met them here, he interacted with them, and I have no way of demonstrating it, but I like to think that he brought them to SOAS.
The plaque, in case you're interested, is in the black granite, and the actual etching of the image, it's the same image you see up there, was done in the People's Republic of China. The marbles from Italy, and the text was done in Surrey. So it's quite a mix. And I think it's really quite beautiful. I now call upon Paul Webley, the present director of SOAS, to say a few words. Maybe mention where it's going to go as well. Oh, I'll mention that then.
Okay. I shall be very brief indeed. There's been lots of speakers already. I think Phil wanted to set the new director a challenge. Yeah, I thought this was slightly mischievous, actually, Phil. You've heard 5 speeches already. You've heard from one of the country's most eloquent and best-loved orators. You've had everything covered, and what more can I say? What can I say to follow that? And he hasn't even written anything down for me to say here. And he didn't give me any hints either, which I thought was even crueler. So I'm just going to say 2 things, and then stand down. The first is that I've been here as director for 7 weeks. It's not long, is it? And I already know that I was right to come here. That's the important thing. Everyone had told me that SOAS was special. The tagline we sometimes use is a place that dares to be different. But SOAS isn't just special, it's unique. That's a much bandied phrase, but it is actually genuinely a unique institution. And I think all the things that we can talk about tonight exemplify that. Now, there's lots of things that make SOAS unique, but I'm not going to go through them all. There's one above all else for me that makes the place unique, and that's our students and their passion. I've met a lot of the students now. They're passionate about what they study. Not just fascinated by it, they're passionate about it. They're passionate about human rights. They're passionate about injustice. And I'll tell you something else about our students that marks them out from nearly all other students elsewhere in the country now. They want to change the world. Our students want to change the world. I don't think that's so true in many other places. And I think in that sense, Paul Robeson is an absolutely typical SOAS student. The one difference, of course, is that they're not quite in the same class as singers and actors. The second thing I'd like to say just relates to the future, because I think Paul Robeson, and I did actually read some things, to be fair, Phil did provide me some information. Paul Robeson's life and work have a message for us here. For SOAS, for Londoners, for Britons, for everyone in the world, actually, Paul Robeson tells us something important. And that is that it's vital that we think of ourselves as a team, it's vital that we think about communities, where individuals work together for the common good. Someone mentioned the word earlier, solidarity they talked about. I thought that was really important. And for me, that's one of the things Paul Robeson teaches us. that if we have a clear aim and we work together to achieve it, then we succeed.
I'd just like to say one thing about the plaque. You might be wondering where it's going. It's not going to stay here forever. Colin and I agreed that it should go in a very, very prominent and conspicuous place in the main building. And it's the first flight of stairs that goes up to the left. The top of there, the portrait will come down, and it'll be mounted right in the middle of there. So it hits you when you come into the building. It hits you when you come upstairs. So we think it's only appropriate that he should be right at the front there somewhere. So that was the decision. Personal reminiscences. There are several people in the audience who have personal memories of meeting with Paul Robeson. But before I invite them up, I'd actually like to read out a personal reminiscence from a woman called Mrs. Jane Mallison. I think she's the wife of the former university doctor. Was there a Nicholas Mallison many, many years ago, I think. I think it's his wife, yes. She met Paul Robeson in 1952, the height of the Un-American Activities Committee's persecution of dissidents. Paul Robeson was unemployable and impoverished. His passport removed, as he'd been blacklisted. In June of that year, my husband and I and our two small sons spent a few days in a small cold water flat in New York, and Robeson visited us briefly. This had to be carefully organised so as not to involve the friends whose flat we were staying in, and I was nervous. I assumed that Robeson was paying a kindly courtesy visit, as he was a friend of my father-in-law, and it wasn't until we were back in England that my husband told me he'd come to collect financial help and messages of encouragement from St. Pancras Labour Party. The children and I were, I suppose, cover for my husband's activities. I never knew that. Anyway, he visited us, and it was one of the most memorable hours of our lives. This magnificent man, beautiful in body and in mind, talked for a while to our 3-year-old son with such humour and gentleness that I felt the child had a life-forming experience. I was overawed by his extraordinary presence and delighted by his wit and charm. I don't think I spoke at all beyond greetings. Not only was this one of the happiest days of my life, it was also one of the most morally memorable, though I was only an onlooker. I'm so happy Robeson is being commemorated in SOAS, a place worthy of him. Jane Mallison. Thank you, Jane. Very nice. Seraphine, our first reminiscer is Baroness Diana Warwick of Undercliff, no less. Also, head of Universities UK. Thank you, Seraphine. Thank you, Diana.
Thank you very much, Phil, and congratulations both to Phil and to SOAS for this wonderful and memorable evening. I met Paul Robeson in 1960 when I was 15 years old. He came to Bradford, my hometown in Yorkshire, as part of a tour that he was able to do when his passport was eventually renewed by the American government. I knew of him and his work because my dad had a record of him singing Negro spirituals, one of the old 78s. And because I loved his voice so much, my dad suggested and encouraged me to find out more about him. That's how I knew that he wasn't only a marvelous singer, but a fine actor and, of course, a very controversial political figure, as well as a great champion for the Negro cause in America. He was and has remained a hero of mine. So when my dad's sister, my Auntie Greta, suggested that we get tickets for his one-night show in St. George's Hall, Bradford, I was absolutely thrilled. He sang, of course, and read and quoted from one of Othello's famous speeches and had something from Eugene O'Neill, which I don't remember, but I guess must have been The Emperor Jones. It was a thrilling performance, and I begged Auntie Greta to go backstage. My recollection was that we were the only people there. But of course, that can't have been true because Paul Robeson was an immensely popular actor. But it was true that he certainly made me feel that he was prepared to give me all the time in the world. We talked about the show and about his tour, and he was so kind that I felt bold enough to tell him how appallingly I thought he had been treated. Well, he realized I was 15 and that I wasn't making a political statement, I was making a human statement. And he asked me how I'd first come to know about him and his work. And when I explained about my dad, he told me how much his father had meant to him, and how in everything he did, he thought about his father's integrity and the encouragement he had given him. And he urged me to be loyal to my convictions. That made an enormous impression on me, as indeed, of course, did Paul Robeson, as he did on everybody else that he met. And sometime later, when I read his manifesto, Here I Stand, which sets out his convictions and what inspired him, he uses exactly that phrase in describing the huge love and respect that he had for his father. He was a towering figure in every way, in every sense, a great orator in his cause and a mighty voice against oppression. He was also a lovely man, and meeting him is one of my most treasured memories.
Thank you for this opportunity. I unfortunately can't say that I ever met Paul Robeson, but I just want to give three quick vignettes of how he made an impact on my life. The first was when, as a child of 9 or 10, I saw King Solomon's Mines. The only thing I remember is Paul Robeson playing Mbopo. Second event, when I was in high school, I had a chance to see Paul play Othello with Uda Hagen and Jose Ferrer at the University of Colorado, where I was going to high school. And the third event, a few years later, was when I was in college at the University of Chicago, and a bunch of students, including ones from Chicago, went to Washington to talk to their senators and to urge on the nation implementation of desegregation and things of that sort. And Paul Robeson spoke to an assembly of us there. All these three things made a very deep impact on me. Thanks.
Thank you, Evan. And I think one more from the linguistics department. Oh, sorry. I'm sorry, yeah.
I'd just like to share one of the several experiences I had of listening to Paul Robeson. In 1959, one of the very early anti-nuclear demonstrations took place in London. There was a very, very large rally in Trafalgar Square. Robeson had been in the country for about a year, and he was actually playing Othello at Stratford at the time, and he came to speak to this rally. I think there were probably 30,000 people in Trafalgar Square. And I recall it very, very vividly. The London University scientist, physicist, J.D. Bernal was chairing the meeting. And D.N. Pritt had also spoken, a number of people that were involved in the peace movement at that time. Most of the people on the demonstration were young then, as I was indeed in those days. And when Robeson arrived, a hush fell over the crowd. And this is an experience that I've never forgotten. Pritt had to raise the microphone to accommodate Robeson's towering height. And Robeson spoke, and from the moment he started speaking, the crowd was totally silent. There wasn't a murmur. He spoke about various visits he had been making to various countries in Europe and also to parts of Africa. And then he sang. He sang, as I recall it, without accompaniment, and the first song he sang was Waterboy. He then sang I'm going to lay down my sword and shield down by the riverside. And he finished with Old Man River. And an extraordinary thing happened. Not only was the crowd completely silent and attentive, as I've never seen any crowd in my life, but all the buses stopped. And in those days, of course, there wasn't a pedestrian thoroughfare around Trafalgar Square. And I looked around and saw bus drivers leaning out of their cabs. Everything was as though frozen in stone. But people were totally attentive. And when I came away from that meeting, people were saying, this is a giant amongst giants. And I said, this is an experience I will never forget. And I've never forgotten it.
Who's singing here tonight? There's Bruce. Linguistics department dominated. Just one more. Thank you, Bruce.
My story is a bit of a mystery, because I don't really know whether I met Paul Robeson or not. But there has been some talk about Paul Robeson being a socialist, and I think he was suspected of being a communist or a communist sympathizer. And I don't know if that's true or not, but I can tell you without any doubt that my father was a communist. And he was also an opera singer. And possibly for that reason, I have a distinct memory from my very early life of at some, by the way, my father sung at Sadler's Wells, which is not far away, in my very early life of going to a flat in the Clerkenwell Road, which is also not very far away, and sitting on the floor with a lot of children, and the adults sat behind us, and in front of us there was a very large black man who sung to us in a beautiful, very powerful and very gentle voice. I've always presumed that this is Paul Robeson. I don't know who else it could have been. Unfortunately, my father died a long time ago, so I can't ask him. And of course, I only thought of this, I only remembered it when I heard that Paul Robeson had been at SOAS in about that time. So it could have been Paul Robeson. It definitely sounds like him. And if it was, I'm very proud and privileged to have heard him sing. But if it wasn't, perhaps somebody can tell me who it was.
The Welwyn Garden City Male Voice Choir are now going to troop on stage and sing 4 of the spirituals that Robeson really liked singing and made famous. So the Welwyn Garden City Male Voice Choir, try not to fall off the steps, guys, as you come up, okay? Tonight is Mary Anstey, Paige Turner is Liz White, and the music director for our choir is Les Rayner.
Way in the middle of the air, 4 to 6 months they don't turn down.
Robeson had a special relationship with the Welsh people in Wales. In the late 20s, he also came into contact with miners who marched to London on the so-called hunger marches from South Wales in particular. So there was this very, very special bond, and we're going to sing two songs in Welsh tonight, and to introduce them is a famous son of Wales, Howell Watkins. Over to you, Howell.
Thank you. Noswaith dda I chi. Good evening, everyone. I remember the director saying a few minutes ago, there's not much left to say. It's like following the Lord Mayor's show, really, isn't it? Well, there was a lot to say about his relationship and his bond with Wales and the Welsh. There was a special bond and its people recognising a culture built around the values of community work and church, and a musical and performance tradition born out of struggle and oppression. He saw parallels between the exploitative nature of Negro experiences in the USA and the coal miners of South Wales, and he actively campaigned and supported them, especially during the days of the Depression. His association with the miners began in 1928. We heard mention earlier of when he was taking part in the showboat performance. He met groups of hunger marchers from South Wales who marched to London. I know how far that journey is by car, the number of times we've made it, even without the M4 and M25 and all those M's and whatever. Even in the days when we came to Hertfordshire back in the 60s, it was 4.5 hours through winding lanes and so on. So it's very, very difficult to imagine the hardships that they saw and suffered on their ways to London. In 1930s, he made several visits to Welsh mining valleys, giving performances here and performances there. In 1934, he performed in North Wales, in Caernarfon, to honour and to give support to the miners who were killed in that horrendous explosion at Gresford Colliery near Wrexham. 266 miners died, and their bodies are still trapped underground. They couldn't be rescued. In 1940, he gave a tribute to the miners in the film The Proud Valley. We heard earlier about the miners singing on their way to work. I was a miner for 10 years. I didn't sing on my way to work. There was nothing to sing about. And sometimes we sing a song that was written by two young London Welsh musicians about Take Me Home. But I remember walking back from the mine with my father. I remember those days. We didn't sing, we talked, yes. But we didn't sing, I can assure you. He played the part of a black labourer arriving in Merthyr, and he very, very soon endeared himself to the population of Wales. Between 1952 and 1957, he was invited to sing at one of the very prestigious music festivals in Wales, the Miners' Eisteddfod. There isn't a Miners' Eisteddfod anymore. There aren't any miners. But in those days, it was one of the, those of you who don't know what an Eisteddfod is, it's a festival, an arts festival, a culture festival, singing, reciting, poetry, prose, and so on. He couldn't sing at the time because he wasn't allowed out of America because, as you heard, his passport had been confiscated. However, by some strange means, in 1957, he managed to speak and sing at the Miners' Eisteddfod over a secretly arranged transatlantic telephone link, beginning with a greeting to those in attendance, and I quote, "My warmest greetings to the people of my beloved Wales, and a special hello to the miners of South Wales at this great festival. It is a great privilege to be partaking in this historic festival. All the best to you as we strive toward a world where we can all live abundant, peaceful, and dignified lives." During the Depression, many Welshmen relocated to and settled in parts of southeast England, the prosperous area of our country. We tonight are very proud to represent these men who came to Welwyn Garden City and other towns and cities around. Very many towns in this particular area have Welsh choirs or have choirs that have their roots in Wales. We are very, very proud of our roots put down in Welwyn Garden City by these men all those years ago in 1935. Last year we celebrated our 70th anniversary. One of the original members of the choir is still alive and around in Welwyn Garden City, and last year he joined us at our celebration, and we were so pleased to see him again. He wasn't singing, but he was proud to be there, and so were we. We are very honoured tonight to have been asked by Phil to come and represent a little corner of Wales, or give a little bit of the Welsh history, a little bit of Welsh flavour to this celebration. And to do that, we sing 2 Welsh songs. The first one, you will be excused if you take out your handkerchiefs. It's a very, very sad, well, no, not sad, it's a love story. And I'm sure you know the title when you hear it. It's called Myfanwy. It's a very poignant love story. One of the members of the choir asked me the other day, what is the English translation? And I said, look, you've got enough problems learning the Welsh of this, forget the English. And by some strange quirk of the imagination, on the musical score, it says Myfanwy, and underneath, Arabella. Now, how Myfanwy translates into Arabella, I don't know. I don't think many people know either. So we'll sing you that one, and then we end our presentation with a Welsh hymn, Gwahoddiad. Gwahoddiad is invitation. In Welsh, mi glywaf dyner lais yn galw arna fi, I ddod I olchi maiau byd, yn afon Calvary. I hear thy tender voice, O Lord, a calling unto me to come and wash my sins away in the river at Calvary. Thank you.
Thank you.
What Harold forgot to mention in his humility was that he solos in this piece. Humility.
Trwy gael
Paul Robeson was a great union supporter, a committed socialist union supporter, and he was fond of singing about the ballad of Joe Hill. Joe Hill was a Swedish-American labour activist who was basically framed by the FBI and the copper mine bosses on a murder charge and executed by firing squad in Utah City in 1915. It's a very, very popular union song in the States. Robeson liked to sing it, and we now have a trio. Drink first. Used to drinking stronger stuff at union meetings. And we're joined for this by Richard Dean on guitar. Lots of practice going into this, you can see. Seeds of our time. Minutes. Joe Hill.
I dreamed I saw Joe Hill last night, alive as you or me. Said I, but Joe, you're 10 years dead. I never died, said he. I never died, said he. In Salt Lake City, Joe, said I, been standing by my side. They framed you on a murder rap. Said Joe, I never died. Said Joe, I never died. The copper bosses killed you, Joe. They filled you full of lead. Takes more than guns to kill a man, said Joe, and I ain't dead. Said Joe, and I ain't dead. Him standing there as big as life and smiling with his eyes, said Joe, what they forgot to kill went on to organize. Went on to organize. From San Diego on to Maine, in every mine and mill, where working men defend their rights, that's where you'll find Joe Hill. That's where you'll find Joe Hill. I dreamed I saw Joe Hill last night, alive as you or me. Said I, but Joe, you're 10 years dead. I never died, said he. I never died, said he. I never died, said he.
Right, our last number. As you can see, we're down to 2 on the stage.
They don't teach counting at SOAS.
Two of the participating in the next number. Okay. One of us sings and one of us plays the piano.
I just did.
Mary plays the piano, I'm trying to sing. That's the bad news. Okay. The good news is that I'm singing one of Paul Robeson's favourite romance songs. I suppose you could say. It's a lullaby as well. It's called Curly Headed Baby. It's one of his most exquisite numbers. that I assure you, I guarantee that the quality of solo singing will definitely improve later on in the evening. So, Carolina Baby. It's originally a Mandarin Chinese song, from some of us. Okay. Carolina Baby. Yeah, okay. Oh, my baby, my curly-headed baby, I'll sing you fast asleep and love you so as I sing. Sing la 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 bye bye. Do you want the stars to play with, or the moon to run away with? They'll come if you don't cry. Sing la 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 bye bye. In your mother's arms be creeping, and soon you'll be asleeping. La 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 bye. Oh, my baby, my curly-headed baby, just tuck your head like little bird beneath its mother's wing. Sing la 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 bye bye. Do you want the stars to play with, or the moon to run away with? They'll come if you don't cry. Sing la 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 bye bye. In your mother's arms be creeping, and soon you'll be asleeping. La 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 la. Thank you.
We are aware that time is passing at a great pace. However, as the new voices, we're pleased to be here. Much has been said, and so I promise to keep talking to an absolute minute. We will do 3 songs for you. I introduce them as they go. The first is a modern gospel song called You Call Me Friend by Fred Hammond.
so much joy. Perfect and true, pure in all your ways, oh Lord, there is none else like you, like you. And all these things keep me in awe of you, and I'm overwhelmed that you would call me friend. And I'm overwhelmed that you would call me friend. And I'm overwhelmed that you would call me friend. That you would call me friend. And I'm overwhelmed that you would call me
Okay, we're now going to do something a little bit unusual. We're going to play something that's a little bit gospel meets jazz. It's a tune called Room 5. It will feature Kevin Davey on flugelhorn, who wrote it. So Kevin Davey, everybody.
do
song, Olivia Tabot. We're not going to finish with one of my own pieces. This is part of a set of 9 called Songs of the Heart. This is number 9 of that 9, where it is the
Rain
bass-baritones of our times. Say with that, right? Please say with that. Sorry it took so long.
Thank you. I have an admission because for many years as a youngster, as a young man, I resisted association with Paul Robeson because people used to say, well, you sound like Paul Robeson. And I didn't want to sound like Paul Robeson because I didn't know who Paul Robeson was. And then some years ago, and also I didn't want to be singing these songs that had become a sort of stereotyping of a black singer, because I wanted to sing classical music and to sort of take a place somewhat for myself. But then I got to learn about the man, and I've been doing a series of concerts called Tribute to Paul Robeson, and I found it very interesting that I thought I'd be doing maybe just 3 concerts when I started doing it, but it's been going on for about, 5 years now. And one of the reasons I chose to do the concert was because when I was learning about what he stood for, what he believed in, and what he not only believed in, but would not be shaken from his belief. And I find it a very current fascination for me that he stood for a truth. He stood for his truth. And I find it very fascinating that there's a thing in the human being, we human beings, that we love the truth, but we resist it like, I don't know what. It's this wonderful thing that I want to know the truth. Tell me. What? And today, that is something that Paul Robeson has left us as an example of truth. And I think, I don't know very much, but I feel that if we had the courage to actually be honest with ourselves, and then just be honest with ourselves, you don't even have to talk about it. Just be honest with yourself. We would change the whole world into a place of, I think so. I'd like to sing 2 songs. I'm a little bit sleepy tonight, please excuse me, because I've just come back from China. But I'm going to do my best. 2 songs. The first one is Deep River, and the next one is one that Mr. Robeson has been very famous for, Old Man River. Deep River first. over Jordan, deep don't you want to go to the gospel feast, that promised land where all is peace? Oh, deep river, my home is over Jordan. Deep river, Lord, I wanna cross over into There's an old man called the Mississippi. That's the old man I'd like to be. What does he care if the world's got troubles? What does he care if the land ain't free? Old Man River, that old man River, he must know something, but he don't say nothing. He just keeps rolling. He keeps on rolling along. He don't plant potatoes, he don't plant cotton, and them that plants them are soon forgotten. But old man River, he just keeps rolling along. You and me, we sweat and strain, body all aching and racked with pain. Hey, you, took that barge! Hey, you, lift that bale, get a little drunk, and you lands in jail. Oh, I gets weary and sick of trying. I'm tired of living, but I'm scared of dying. But old man River, he just keeps rolling along. New things come and old things go, but all things look the same to Joe. Folks get mad and goes to war, then gets glad, don't know what for. I keeps laughing instead of crying. I I must keep living until I'm dying. But old man River, he just keeps rolling
I did promise you that the standard of solo singing would improve as the evening went on. Thank you, Sibella, that was fantastic. We can wrap things up now, really. Time is getting on. I mean, I think it's been a really special occasion. It's a very, very special occasion tonight. Thank you to special guests, Tony Benn, who will invite, and all the speakers that addressed us tonight. To the two choirs, under the direction of Alex Douglas and Les Rayner, and Mary Anstey, who's been accompanying us. And thanks to you guys for being such a wonderfully supportive audience. I'd just like to sign off with some remarks very quickly from Lloyd Brown, who writes in his book on Paul Robeson. Just recently met Paul Robeson a few years before Paul died. On April 15th, 1973, a few years before the great man died, the Carnegie Hall celebration was arranged for Robeson's 70th birthday. He'd suffered from ill health and obscurity in America and remarked, "I want you to know I'm the same Paul, dedicated as ever to the worldwide cause of humanity for freedom, peace and brotherhood. My heart is with the continuing struggle of my own people for not only equal rights but an equal share." He then added, "But I keeps laughing instead of crying. I must keep fighting until I'm dying. And Old Man River, he just keeps rolling along." Thank you very much, everybody.